In a small village nestled among the mountains, where the thin air carried the distant sound of temple bells, lived a blind boy who, from an early age, displayed an extraordinary connection to the world around him. On winter mornings, as snow blanketed the rooftops of the humble homes, he would sit on the doorstep of his house, listening to the world awakening with an attentiveness few could comprehend. His mother, a devout Buddhist practitioner, had noticed early on how her son responded to the teachings she gently shared. On nights when she told stories about the Buddha and his disciples, the boy absorbed every word with a depth that transcended mere intellectual understanding. He had a particular way of tilting his head when something touched his heart, as though he could perceive the truth within the ancient words with his ears. His father, a woodworker, had adapted his workshop so that his son could explore the world through touch. During quiet afternoons, while the father carved figures of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the boy spent hours running his fingers over the sacred shapes, discovering stories within the textures of the wood that his eyes could not see. It was through these carvings that he first understood the tale of Buddha Shakyamuni renouncing the palace, his fingers tracing the path of Prince Siddhartha as he left the Golden Gates behind. As he grew older, his presence in the village became increasingly remarkable. Unlike other blind children, who often withdrew from the world, he developed a unique way of engaging with everyone and everything around him. When merchants from distant lands stopped in the village, bringing with them the aroma of incense and spices, the boy sought them out to hear their stories about the great monasteries and the masters who resided there. The way he moved through the village also drew attention. While others worried about his safety, he walked with a serene confidence, as though each step was a form of meditation. The elder villagers said he reminded them of ancient Zen masters who practiced the art of walking in complete presence, where every step was a silent prayer. It was during the visit of a venerable wandering monk to the village that the boy's destiny began to take a new turn. The monk, observing how the boy responded to the subtleties of the teachings during a ceremony at the small local temple, recognized something rare in him, the very quality described in ancient texts as Dharma eyes, a natural ability to perceive the true nature of things. The monk shared with the boy's parents the story of Venerable Anuruddha, one of Buddha's foremost disciples who, even after losing his physical sight, developed what the sutras call the divine eye, a profound understanding that transcends ordinary vision. He spoke of how, in ancient monasteries, the absence of physical sight was sometimes seen as a hidden blessing, allowing the practitioner to develop a deeper perception of reality. The boy's parents, who had long observed his natural inclination toward a contemplative life, realized at that moment that their role was not to shield him from the world, but to allow him to follow his true path. After long conversations with the wandering monk, they learned of an ancient monastery in the highest mountains, renowned for its lineage of masters who emphasized the cultivation of inner wisdom beyond physical limitations. When the boy turned 12, traditionally considered the appropriate age to begin monastic training, his parents took him to the monastery. The journey was long and arduous, ascending steep paths where the air grew increasingly thin. Yet the boy seemed to gain strength with every step that brought him closer to the monastery, as though each meter of elevation lifted him not only physically but spiritually. Upon reaching the monastery gates, they were greeted by the abbot, a man whose presence radiated a profound stillness that could be felt even in silence. After hearing the boy's story and observing his demeanor, the abbot shared a fundamental teaching of the Buddha, that every being possesses Buddha nature, regardless of their physical conditions, and that often it is precisely our apparent obstacles that become the gateways to liberation. Recalling the Buddha's words that true vision comes from the heart, not the eyes, the abbot accepted the boy as a disciple. In that moment, as the monastery bells rang to announce the arrival of a new student, the boy felt he had finally come home, not to the physical home he had left behind in the village, but to the spiritual home his heart had been seeking all along. The first rays of sunlight had yet to touch the snow-capped peaks when the young monk was awakened by the sound of the makigyo, the wooden drum marking the start of the morning practices. During his early days at the monastery, each awakening brought a mix of excitement and apprehension. The temple's vast, unfamiliar space felt like an invisible labyrinth, with every corridor presenting a new challenge, every staircase a test of courage. The monastery, built centuries ago on the mountain slopes, was a complex of interconnected wooden structures whose floors creaked softly underfoot. For the sighted monks, the layout followed a clear logic inspired by sacred mandalas. For the young monk, however, every step was a discovery, every sound a puzzle to decipher. In those initial days, his determination to be independent often manifested as a quiet form of pride. When other monks, noticing his struggles, offered to guide him to the meditation hall or dining area, he politely declined. "I need to learn on my own," he would say, while his fingers sought support along the old wooden walls. His falls were frequent, and each stumble echoed through the silent corridors as a reminder of his stubbornness. An elderly monk, observing his daily struggles, began placing small objects in his path. A little broom here, a bell there. Inevitably, the young monk would trip over them. After each fall, the old monk would gently retrieve the object and place it elsewhere. What seemed like an act of cruelty concealed a profound lesson the young monk had yet to understand. One particularly difficult afternoon, after getting lost on his way to the sutra room and injuring his knee in a fall, the young monk was summoned to the presence of the headmaster. The scent of sandalwood incense filled the small room where the master awaited him. For long moments, only the sound of their breathing filled the space. "Tell me," the master finally said, "what have you learned during your solitary walks through the monastery?" The young monk, feeling the weight of the question, spoke honestly about his frustrations and his desire to prove his ability to be independent. The master listened in silence, the occasional sound of his teacup touching the wooden table marking the passage of time. The master then shared the ancient parable of the blind man and the elephant. He recounted how each man, touching only a part of the animal, the trunk, the leg, the tail, believed he understood its true nature. Each was simultaneously correct in their limited experience and wrong in their absolute conclusion. Like these men, the master explained, all of us, whether sighted or not, are blind to the true nature of reality when we cling solely to our limited perspectives. True wisdom begins when we recognize the boundaries of our understanding. The master revealed that the elderly monk who had placed obstacles in his path had been blind himself for over 2 decades. He learned, said the master, that the monastery is not merely a collection of buildings, but a living web of relationships and interdependence. Every monk is both teacher and student. Every obstacle both challenge and opportunity. In the days that followed, the young monk began to realize how his pursuit of independence had become a form of isolation. He started noticing how the sound of other monks' footsteps created a sound map of the corridors, how the aroma of incense at different altars could guide him, how the touch of the wind on his face signaled the presence of doors and windows. Gradually, he learned to accept help not as a sign of his inadequacy, but as an expression of the fundamental interconnection the Buddha had taught. Every hand extended to guide him became an opportunity to practice humility. Every word of guidance, a chance to cultivate gratitude. The elderly monk who had once placed obstacles in his path became his first true teacher beyond the headmaster. Together, they developed a navigation system for the monastery based on sounds, textures, and scents. What once had been a daunting labyrinth began to reveal itself as a sacred space, where every element from the moss on the stones to the echo of the bells had a story to tell and a lesson to impart. One morning, as he confidently made his way to the dawn ceremony, the young monk realized that his true journey was not about learning to move through the monastery on his own, but about understanding that he had never truly been alone. His blindness, which initially seemed like an obstacle to overcome, was revealing itself as a gateway to a deeper understanding of the Dharma, a constant reminder that true vision transcends physical sight. As the seasons passed, the monastery revealed itself to the young monk as a living symphony of sensations. What had once been a space of uncertainty transformed into a rich universe of textures, sounds, aromas, and flavors, each telling its own story about the profound nature of reality. The monastery's mornings, once intimidating, became a ritual of sensory discovery. The young monk developed such a refined understanding of sounds that he could identify each monk by the unique rhythm of their footsteps. Some walked with the lightness of a falling leaf, while others carried the weight of years of diligent practice. The monk responsible for the library had a peculiar gait, slightly dragging his right foot, consequence of years spent carrying heavy sacred texts. The gardener's steps, on the other hand, seemed to dance, reflecting his intimate connection with the earth he nurtured. The sounds of the monastery became his first teacher. The main bell, rung at different times of the day, was not merely a timekeeper, but an ancient voice singing of impermanence. He learned to distinguish its subtle tonal variations, clearer on winter mornings, deeper on humid summer afternoons. The young monk discovered that by paying close attention, he could hear the bell's echoes reverberating through the monastery's structures, creating a sonic map that helped him navigate. During chanting ceremonies, his heightened auditory sensitivity allowed him to perceive how the monks' voices intertwined in harmony. He could tell when a monk was tired by the slight change in their tone, or when another was particularly inspired by how their voice rose with fervor. This keen perception soon made him an integral presence in the chanting rituals, where his ability to maintain tone and rhythm helped guide the others. Touch became his second source of wisdom. His hands learned to read the stories carved into the monastery's ancient wooden statues, each groove a word in a language only his fingers could decipher. The headmaster, noticing his interest in the sculptures, shared the tale of an ancient Buddhist sculptor who, legend said, carved his statues in complete darkness, guided solely by touch and inner intuition. In meditation practices, his body developed an extraordinary sensitivity to changes in temperature and air currents. He could sense the approach of rain hours before it arrived, noticing subtle shifts in air pressure and humidity. This connection with the natural elements led him to a deeper understanding of the Buddhist teachings on the interdependence of all phenomena. The aroma of incense, which once merely marked moments of practice, became a precise guide. Each altar in the monastery used a unique combination of fragrances, creating an olfactory geography that the young monk navigated with increasing confidence. The sandalwood at the main altar, jasmine in the meditation hall, cedar in the library, each fragrance became a landmark in his inner landscape. In the monastery's kitchen, where he participated in meal preparations, his refined palate astonished even the most seasoned monks. He could identify different types of tea by scent alone, and his ability to detect the precise doneness of food through sound and smell made him a valuable assistant during retreat preparations. One day, while helping organize the library, the young monk came across an ancient text that described the 18 elements of perception in Buddhism. The headmaster, noticing his interest, explained how each sense was not just a doorway to the external world, but a path to understanding the true nature of the mind. Each sensation, the master taught, is like a dewdrop reflecting the entire moon. Within every sensory experience lies the entirety of the Dharma. During a spring retreat, when the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, a visiting monk remarked on how the young monk moved through the monastery with a grace that seemed to transcend the need for physical sight. The headmaster, hearing the comment, shared an ancient teaching. The eyes may show us the form of things, but it is the heart that perceives their true nature. Our young brother has not overcome his blindness. He has transcended the very notion that there is anything to overcome. As his sensory understanding deepened, the young monk began to see each sense as a different facet of the same diamond-pure awareness, which the Buddha taught as our true nature. His daily experiences became a living meditation where every sound, touch, aroma, and taste offered an opportunity to awaken to the present reality. One particularly silent night, as he listened to the distant sound of a mountain stream, the young monk had a profound realization. His blindness was not an absence of vision, but an invitation to cultivate a more complete form of perception. Like the lotus that grows in the mud to bloom on the surface, his limitations had become the fertile soil for his spiritual growth. Autumn had arrived in the mountains with unusual intensity that year. Golden leaves swirled through the monastery courtyard, carried by winds that foretold a profound change. The elder monks, attuned to the signs of nature, could sense that an extraordinary storm was approaching. What none of them could predict was how that night would deeply transform the life of the young blind monk. The monastery was in the midst of an extended meditation retreat, a 49-day period of intensive practice. During this time, the silence was even deeper than usual, broken only by the sound of bells marking practice sessions and meal times. The young monk had grown especially sensitive to this silence, discovering subtleties within it that others could scarcely imagine. On the afternoon before the storm, he noticed subtle shifts in the environment, the sudden stillness of the birds, a faint buzzing in his ears caused by the change in air pressure, and the distinctive scent of ozone that heralded major storms. He shared his observations with the headmaster, who immediately ordered special preparations, a foresight that would prove invaluable. When the storm finally struck, it did so with a ferocity that surprised even the most seasoned monks. The wind howled through the monastery corridors like a wild beast, making the ancient wooden structures creak and groan. Rain fell in dense sheets, pounding the roof tiles in a deafening cacophony that disoriented even those monks who could see. Amid the storm's peak, one of the elderly monks, who suffered from respiratory issues, fell ill in his quarters. The combination of damp air and high altitude had triggered a severe crisis. Amid the chaos of the elements, his faint calls for help were barely audible over the storm's roar. It was the young monk who noticed first. Amid the storm's chaotic symphony, his trained ears detected an irregularity in the rhythm of the sounds, a strained breathing coming from one of the monastery's older wings. It was a sound that stood out against the natural patterns of rain and wind, a labored rhythm his heightened sensitivity recognized as a distress signal. Without hesitation, he rose from his meditation and began navigating the darkened corridors. The storm had knocked out the monastery's electricity, plunging everything into a darkness that, for the first time, placed all the residents on equal footing in their perception of space. Even those who could see were disoriented by the pitch blackness and the storm's deafening noise. For the young monk, however, darkness had never been an obstacle. Years of practice had transformed his relationship with space into something that transcended the need for light. His feet knew every floorboard, every uneven surface, every turn in the path. The sound of the elderly monk's labored breathing was like a beacon, guiding him through the labyrinth of corridors. As he approached, he could feel the walls vibrating under the storm's assault, hear the ominous creaks of old beams, and smell the damp wood and mold intensifying in areas where the rain had begun to seep through. Every sensation provided vital information, enabling him to navigate safely through an environment that had become perilous even for those who could see. He found the elderly monk in a state of severe distress, struggling to breathe in the humid, thin air. With a calmness that contrasted sharply with the storm's fury, the young monk helped his elder to his feet. Bearing much of the older man's weight, he began guiding him through the trembling corridors toward the infirmary, where he knew they would find the necessary supplies. The journey back was one of pure awareness and presence. Every step had to be calculated, every movement precisely planned. The young monk used his body as a living compass, shielding the elder from obstacles scattered by the storm-fallen branches that had blown in through broken windows, puddles that made the floor slippery, loose beams threatening to collapse. When they finally reached the infirmary, other monks had already gathered there, drawn by the noise of their movement. By the flickering light of emergency candles, they watched in awe as the young monk, with precision and efficiency, located the necessary medicines, identifying them by touch and smell. After the elderly monk had been medicated and his condition stabilized, the headmaster gathered everyone present. In the dim, wavering candlelight, he shared a story of the Buddha crossing a tempestuous river, a parable about how true strength lies, not in controlling external circumstances, but in the inner calm that allows one to navigate them. Tonight, the master said, our young brother has shown us something precious. In the deepest darkness, he saw with clarity. Amid the most deafening chaos, he heard the call of suffering. In the face of fear, he found the path of compassion. The storm raged on through the night, but something had shifted within the monastery. The monks understood that they had witnessed not just an act of courage, but a living demonstration of the Buddhist teachings on the true nature of vision. The young monk, for his part, realized that his greatest trial had become his moment of greatest clarity. In the darkness of that tempestuous night, his inner light had shone brighter than ever before. The news of what had happened during the storm spread beyond the monastery walls, traveling from village to village in the mountains like cherry blossom petals carried by the wind. Soon, people began making pilgrimages to the monastery, not just to seek traditional Dharma teachings, but specifically to meet the blind young monk who had demonstrated such clarity amidst the darkness. At first, the young monk felt uncomfortable with the attention. His reserved nature made him question whether he truly had anything valuable to share. But one morning, as he meditated in the garden, feeling the dew under his bare feet, he recalled the Buddha's words about how every being has the capacity to light the way for others, just as one candle lights another without losing its own flame. His teaching sessions began in an unconventional manner. Instead of giving formal lectures in the main hall, as was customary, he invited visitors to walk with him through the monastery gardens. During these walks, he asked them to close their eyes and rely on their other senses. For many, it was the first time they experienced the world in this way, and the experience was often transformative. Close your eyes, he would instruct gently, and allow the world to reveal itself in other ways. Feel how the wind carries stories from distant places, how each step on the moss tells the tale of the seasons, how the bird songs map the sky. His calm and centered voice guided participants on a journey through a sensory universe that had always been there but was rarely noticed. During one such session, a young artist, frustrated by a creative block, found herself weeping as she realized how blind she had become to the beauty of the world in her obsessive pursuit of visual perfection. The young monk shared with her the story of an ancient Zen master who painted masterpieces in the dark, trusting only his inner connection to the essence of what he wished to express. During meditation retreats, he introduced a unique practice: periods of meditation conducted in complete darkness. Participants were invited to explore how the absence of visual stimuli could open doors to a deeper understanding of their own minds. Many reported that, for the first time, they could truly see their thoughts and emotions with clarity. A scholar visiting the monastery, intrigued by the young monk's approach, asked him about his teaching methods. The monk smiled and replied, "I teach nothing new. I simply help people remove the blindfolds they didn't know they were wearing. The darkness I share with them is like a mirror reflecting their own inner light." His fame grew not only for his wisdom, but also for the way he embodied the teachings in every aspect of his presence. When serving tea to visitors, every movement was a demonstration of mindfulness. The sound of water being poured, the aroma of the brewing tea, the warmth of the cup, each element became an opportunity to awaken to the present moment. Over time, he developed specific exercises for the different groups that sought him out. For musicians, he created practices exploring the space between sounds. For visual artists, he introduced tactile perception exercises that revolutionized their understanding of form and texture. For advanced meditation practitioners, he offered insights into how consciousness transcends all senses. On one memorable occasion, a group of children from a local school visited the monastery. Instead of giving them a formal sermon, the young monk turned the visit into a sensory adventure. He created a garden of senses where each child could explore various textures, aromas, and sounds. The children's laughter as they discovered the world through fresh eyes echoed through the monastery halls, reminding everyone present of the natural joy that comes from pure discovery. One day, a younger monk asked him how he had developed such clarity in his teachings. The young monk replied by sharing an old story about a deep well. The deeper we dig, the purer the water we find. My blindness was like a spade that forced me to dig deeper into my own nature until I found a source of understanding that doesn't rely on sight. The headmaster, observing his disciple's growth, noted how he had become a living example of the Buddha's teaching that every apparent obstacle can be transformed into a path to liberation. The young monk had not only transcended his own condition, but was helping others transcend their self-imposed limitations. His teaching sessions often ended at sunset, as the monastery was bathed in the golden light of twilight. In those moments, while participants marveled at the visual spectacle, the young monk would smile, knowing they had learned to see not only with their eyes, but with their entire being. His journey through darkness had become a guiding light for others, showing that true vision is not an attribute of the eyes, but a quality of the awakened heart. Years had passed since the young monk first arrived at the monastery. His hair, now streaked with silver, reflected the wisdom accumulated through the seasons. On a tranquil autumn afternoon, during a special tea ceremony, a visiting diplomat asked a question that touched the hearts of all present. "Venerable one, have you ever regretted not being able to see the beauty of the world?" The silence that followed was as deep as a mountain lake. The aroma of freshly brewed green tea filled the air, and the distant sound of temple bells echoed softly. The monk, now a revered master, allowed the moment to unfold naturally, like a lotus flower opening at dawn. "Let me share a story," he began, his voice as serene as water flowing over polished stones. In the Buddha's time, there was a man crossing a vast desert. Consumed by thirst, he wandered for days, dreaming of water. In his mind, he envisioned endless oceans, but these visions could not quench his thirst. Only when he stopped chasing mirages and paid attention to the signs around him did he find a small oasis that had always been nearby. Pausing to pour more tea, his hands moved with the natural grace born of countless repetitions. He continued, "Many believe that beauty is something to be seen with the eyes. But I have discovered that beauty is like the air we breathe. It is everywhere, waiting to be noticed. I don't need to see the sunrise to feel its warmth caressing my skin. I don't need to see flowers to appreciate their fragrance dancing on the wind. I don't need to see smiling faces to feel the joy radiating from the hearts of those around me." A newly ordained monk asked, "But how do you navigate a world you cannot see?" The master smiled, a smile that carried the wisdom of his struggles and discoveries. "When we stop relying solely on our eyes, we realize the universe speaks to us in 1,000 different voices. The wind whispers directions, the birds sing maps of the sky, our feet read stories written on the ground. It's not about compensating for the lack of sight, but awakening to a fuller way of perceiving reality." At that moment, as if to illustrate his words, a gentle breeze entered through the window, bringing with it the scent of plum blossoms and the distant sound of monks chanting. The master gestured expansively, encompassing everyone present. "Observe," he said. "Right now, how many layers of beauty surround us? The sound of our breathing blending together, the warmth of the sun on the floorboards, the aroma of the tea, the texture of the air on our skin, the silence between our words. True beauty, like true wisdom, is not something we see, it is something we are." A writer attending the ceremony remarked, "But surely there must be moments of darkness and loneliness?" The master placed his teacup gently on the table, the delicate sound echoing in the attentive silence. "Darkness," he replied, "has been my greatest teacher. It has shown me that what we call limitations are actually gateways to deeper understanding. When we fully embrace our unique path, we discover we were never truly limited, only seeing through a narrow perspective." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with colors visible to only some of those present, the master shared his final words. "The Buddha taught that all beings possess the nature of enlightenment, just as every moment holds the seed of realization. My blindness is not an absence of light, but a constant invitation to find the light that never fades, the one that shines within our hearts." This story teaches us that our apparent limitations are not obstacles to be overcome, but unique paths to spiritual awakening. The blind monk did not overcome his blindness. He transformed it into a portal to a deeper understanding of reality. True vision, as demonstrated by the monk's journey, does not depend on physical sight, but on the clarity of the heart and mind. Every challenge we face in life is not a barrier to growth, but an invitation to develop new ways of understanding and wisdom. The central message is that enlightenment does not come from transcending our conditions, but from embracing them fully as our unique path to awakening. Like the lotus that blooms in the mud, it is through our greatest challenges that we find our deepest fulfillment. This story reminds us that each of us has a unique path to awakening, and that our apparent limitations may be exactly what we need to discover our true nature. True wisdom lies not in seeing the world as others do, but in awakening to our own way of perceiving and sharing the truth.